Welcome to Loyola Marymount University and the Urban Lecture Series. We are celebrating our 100th anniversary at Loyola Marymount University, providing incredible academic excellence to the city of Los Angeles. In addition, we are celebrating our 10th year of a partnership with LA 36, airing the Urban Lecture Series throughout the city of Los Angeles. In addition, we're also going to be talking to Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. We're talking about 20 years after the riots, the disturbances. So let me introduce our guest. It's LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. He was first elected to the County Board of Supervisors in 1994. Before that, he served at the city of Los Angeles from 75 to about 94. We're going to get right to it and start talking about public policy, politics, and what's happening with the city of LA. And the first thing, though, for the students and the audience, what do you do?
Well, the Board of Supervisors is the governing body of the County of Los Angeles. The state of California is divided into 58 subdivisions called counties. Los Angeles County obviously is the biggest of the 58 counties. Except for the city and county of San Francisco, all the other 57 counties are governed by a board of 5 supervisors. It's an archaic form of government. It goes back to the turn of the last century, if not earlier. And as I like to say, Los Angeles has the same 5 supervisorial structure that Mono County has. And Mono County cows outnumber people like 100 to 1. And they have 5 supervisors, and we have 10 million people, and we have 5 supervisors.
So you're for more than 5 supervisors. You would expand the Board of Supervisors
well,
if you could?
I would either expand them with an elected executive, which I've always believed was a good idea.
So a mayor of LA County.
A mayor, a county mayor, or county executive, as it's called in most parts of the country. But I would not support expanding the Board of Supervisors if you didn't have an elected executive, because it would make it just more unruly. But the board is a governing body, and we oversee a budget of $23 billion.
Let's stress that again, $23 billion, that's with a B.
That's with a B. To put it more succinctly, we would be, if we were our own state, we would be the 8th largest state in the United States. We'd be bigger than Michigan. So when you talk about LA County, you're talking about something between Michigan and Ohio, or Michigan and Pennsylvania. It's a big organization. We employ 100,000 people, roughly. We are the biggest employer, public or private, in the county of Los Angeles. So the county government has always been, but even more so now, a major player, not only in public policy issues, but it's also a major player in the economy in general. If we lay off 10,000 people, the economy of the region would feel it. When we hire more people, the economy is the beneficiary. So it's a big job, and we run the gamut of everything from transportation to healthcare, to mental health, to child welfare. Each one of those departments that I just mentioned have a budget that is equal to or greater than the city of Los Angeles budget. So our sheriff's department, which is run by the sheriff, but whose budget is overseen and approved by the Board of Supervisors. And so we provide those services. And for most people in the county of Los Angeles, if people are on welfare, or if they don't have health insurance, or if they don't have insurance that gives them mental health coverage if they have mental health issues, or if you're an abused child, or you're looking to adopt a child, all of those issues come through one of the county departments. In addition to which, the county is the law enforcement arm for not only for the county, for its the areas within its jurisdiction. The county of Los Angeles, the law enforcement is also contracted out to some of the cities in the county. For example, as I said, the state subdivides into 58 counties. The county subdivides into 88 cities. There are 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles that add up to about 8.5 million people. The other 1.5 million people live in what we call unincorporated areas that never became cities for one reason or another. These are disjointed areas. They're disconnected. Topanga Canyon.
Examples of that are close by Marina Del Rey.
Marina Del Rey, East Los Angeles, Altadena.
Lenox, which is nearby
Lenox,
here.
Willowbrook. They aren't contiguous areas, but they add up. When you add them all up, the populations add up to about 1.5 million people. So we provide all municipal services. In addition to the human services that I mentioned, we also provide municipal services.
That means
to
you're
these
like you're the city council.
We're both the county supervisor and the city council. So take the city of Los Angeles. City of Los Angeles has its own city, its own mayor, its own city council. They provide police protection, they provide fire protection, they trim the trees and pave the streets and fix the sidewalks and provide the parks. Those are the basic municipal services that a city provides. But if you're in Altadena, and you're not because you're in Altadena, you're not in a city. Altadena is a community, an unincorporated community. Your police protection comes from the county sheriff, and your fire protection comes from the county fire department. And we pave your streets, and we trim your trees, and we do all those municipal functions. Then there's a category of cities, about 44 of them, 42, 43, 44, that contract for their services from us. So take the city of West Hollywood, which is in my supervisorial district. When the city of West Hollywood became a city some 25 or more years ago, they had a decision to make. Will they form their own police department, their own fire department, or will they contract it out with somebody else?
Well, what's the pros and the cons of that?
The pros of having your own police department is that you have your own police department that presumably is sensitive to the issues of that particular community. They're based there. You have control of their budget. If you add to the budget of the local police department, you know you're going to get the service in West Hollywood. It's not going to go to some other community. On the other hand, the downside is that it's very expensive. And most of the smaller cities, whether it's Malibu or West Hollywood or Calabasas or Agoura Hills, and many of the other, some 44 cities in the county, have chosen not to have their own police department because it's just too darn expensive. So they come to us, they contract their service for our services with them, and the sheriff provides them, as a contracting agent, police protection. So West Hollywood, to use that example, has county sheriffs patrolling their streets, has the county fire department responding to their fire calls and paramedic calls. And so that's one of those elements of county government that we are a contracting agent. And it's a big part of our organization, especially in law enforcement, animal regulation, and a few other minor issues that we contract out. And then the last thing we do is, as I like to say, it's the fun part of the job, but we are the cultural arm of the region. The County of Los Angeles historically has been and continues to be the driving force in the cultural arts in the region. The Hollywood Bowl is a county-owned facility. The Music Center in downtown is a county-owned facility. The County Museum of Art on Wilshire Boulevard is obviously a county-owned facility. The Natural History Museum at Exposition Park is a county-owned facility, and there are many others. And so we are a cultural agent in town, and we are able, because of our size and the historic nature of providing this service, we are the principal driving force in the cultural arts in the County of Los Angeles. And this has been a particularly exciting time the last 10 or 15 years in LA, because we have just what I call witnessed the explosion of cultural venues. It's the golden age of the arts in Los Angeles.
And what explains that happening right now? Why now, especially in an era of budget constraints? How is the county being able to do that?
Well, first of all, it's not all county funded. Much of the explosion of cultural venues in the region have been privately paid for. Walt Disney Concert Hall and at the Music Center was largely paid for by private donations, $275 million in private donations. The county built the parking garage, and that was not inconsequential. It was a $100 million deal, but it was paid for by the people who are patrons of the hall and pay for parking. So it worked, and it was a tremendous catalytic event, both for development in downtown Los Angeles, residential development in particular, and it was also catalytic generally for the cultural arts, because it gave. It raised the bar for the private sector as to what they could do and how much they could do and how much should be expected of them. So the Getty Center was built around the same time. The Colburn School of Music and the Colburn Conservatory of Music, all privately funded, were built around the same time. The expansion of the LA County Museum of Art, which is largely privately, the construction of which was largely privately funded, happened around the same time.
Right, and beyond that, these are not county, even on county land, but Staples Center or the Cathedral or other major projects, and I think they got a boost from all this other development that was going on.
Yeah.
So let's review. The county has 10 million people, 5 supervisors. That means each one of you represents 2 million people.
That's correct.
That's more than 10 governors.
15 or 16 governors.
Right, so you represent 4 times as many people as Sarah Palin did when she was governor of Alaska.
Yeah, and I can't see Russia from my house, so as much as I've tried to find it.
But in addition, there is no mayor, so the 5 supervisors are both the executive and the legislative branch.
That's right.
And so that gives a tremendous amount of power.
Yes, on paper, it's a very powerful job, and in reality, it's a very powerful job.
It's the most powerful legislative body in America. There is no other local legislative body that is more powerful, or can you think of one?
No, there isn't, and it's not just a legislative body. In fact, most of what we do is not legislative. We are an executive body more than a legislative body, and so when you look at our agenda every week, most of the items in our agenda are executive items. It's a contract to build a new building, or to fix a street, or to build a transit project, or what have you. And the fact of the matter is that we very rarely legislate, because most of the laws that a county needs have already been on the books for some time. And most of our laws, all of our laws, only apply in the unincorporated areas.
Right.
So when we pass a law banning the sale or the use of plastic bags at supermarkets, that doesn't apply in the city of Los Angeles or the city of Beverly Hills or the city of El Monte. It applies only in these unincorporated communities that I mentioned earlier. What we do when we pass legislation like that, and I authored the ban on plastic bags several years ago, what we do is we as I like to paraphrase Prince Metternich, when Los Angeles County sneezes, the rest of the region catches a cold. When we do something, others follow suit. So when we passed the plastic bag ban, the city of Los Angeles got interested. They haven't approved it yet, but I'm hopeful that they will soon.
You're talking about those small plastic bags that, when you go to the grocery store.
Those are the bags,
yeah.
and they're an environmental disaster. I mean, this is not just some do-gooder elite environmental issue. Most of these plastic bags end up as trash. They are urban tumbleweed. In the inner city, they blow in the wind. They get into every nook and cranny in the community. And eventually, a good chunk of these plastic bags end up in our storm drains or in our flood control channels, and they end up in the Santa Monica Bay. And then they get taken out by the current out into the ocean. And there's that whirlpool out somewhere 1,000 miles out in the Pacific Ocean, which has the stagnant area where garbage from all over the west coast of the United States has accumulated, and the biggest chunk of garbage that accumulates there are plastic bags. So what we're trying to do, and of course it's very dangerous and harmful to the marine life, and some of the endangered marine life is particularly endangered by these bags, because they ingest them and then they die. So we're trying to make a dent in the plastic bag population of our state. The state had a bill, a legislator pushed, I think it was Alex Padilla who pushed the bill to get a plastic bag ban, but the petrochemical industry, which manufactures these plastic bags, were powerful enough to kill the bill up in Sacramento. And so we decided we'd do it in LA and start a chain reaction. So there have been a number of cities that have approved those
I'm sure, like
ordinances.
West Hollywood and some of the more liberal.
Well, actually, some of them.
Santa Monica?
They're Santa Monica, Malibu, Calabasas, and some that are not so liberal or affluent have also done it or are getting ready to do it. The big one is the city of LA, and for some reason they've taken their time about it. But most people in LA get it, and it's not a hard thing to use a reusable bag, and if you forget your reusable bag, our law requires that you pay 10 cents for a paper bag, and it's working. It's definitely working, and it'll have an impact. So I use that as an example. Yeah. I'll give you another example, which is maybe more more dramatic, which is that in the 90s, the County Board of Supervisors on my motion, on my proposal, banned gun shows in the County of Los Angeles. We used to have several gun shows a year at the Pomona Fairgrounds that became marketplaces for illegal weaponry, including mortars and bazookas and all kinds of stuff, and we banned it.
So now if I want a bazooka, I have to go outside of the LA County?
Yeah, you have to go to Las Vegas, or maybe Orange County, but even Orange County, I think, is having questions about that. But that case went all the way up the federal court system, and we prevailed. We passed, when I was on the city council, we passed, again, it was my proposal, a ban on assault weapons when the legislature had refused to ban assault weapons. There was a bill, it got killed by the gun industry. We did it in LA. The minute we did it in LA, the legislature revisited the issue and approved a weaker.
Was that Dave Roberti's?
It was, I think it was Mike Roos, actually, if my memory serves me correctly.
So when we talk about a LA County, 5 supervisors, kind of executives, I'm told that the informal culture is that in your district, that you can basically determine what the policy should be because the other 4 supervisors will defer to you, and as a quid pro quo, you will defer to them. And so that it really creates a situation where you are the prime executive in that one area and the other supervisors in their one area. How does that work?
I think that's an overstatement of the way it works. On land use matters, that tends to be the case.
Explain to students in the audience what land use means.
Land use is zoning. When you own a piece of property, it's governed by, what you can do with that property is governed by the zoning code of a city or in our case by the county. And so if you own a piece of property that's zoned for a single family home and you want to build an apartment building on it, you can't do it. Now you can try to get the city council or the board of supervisors to change the zone, but it's not that easy.
So in that area, you guys defer to each other?
Usually, not always. I've been beaten in my district a couple of times because I represent the Santa Monica Mountains area. I represent the western part of LA County.
And the San Fernando Valley.
Represent the west side of the city and most of the San Fernando Valley. And I go from Arleta, just east of Griffith Park, all the way out to the Ventura County line, and everything north of Pico to the northern end of the San Fernando Valley. So I have a big chunk, and all the way out to the Ventura County line. So the area the unincorporated area that I represent which is where we have zoning authority, are the Santa Monica Mountains. Most of the rest of my district is incorporated into separate cities, and we have no authority over the individual cities. So my policies in the development realm have been to protect the Santa Monica Mountains really at all costs, and we have adopted in the 17 years I've been on the Board of Supervisors, we've developed and approved some of the most restrictive zoning laws in the country.
You haven't gotten much resistance in that area.
I've gotten some.
And what's an example of where you lost in terms of that particular issue?
First year or two that I was on the supervisors, I tried to stop a subdivision in the hills above Malibu, and I got beat 3-2 under the old regime of supervisors. But for the most part, we have prevailed, and it's not easy. Because my policies have been very aggressive. We have prohibited building buildings on ridge lines. Nothing drives me more crazy than to see a mountain shaved off at the top so that you create a plateau so you can build a subdivision on it, because once you lose the ridge line of a mountain, you can't put it back. And the Santa Monica Mountains are some of the most beautiful natural terrain and natural habitat west of the Mississippi, really, and there's no place in the United States that is so close to really adjacent to a major metropolitan area like ours, which has rivers and streams running through it and waterfalls. And a day like today, when it's raining outside in Malibu Canyon and Topanga Canyon, there will be waterfalls coming down. You think you're in Maui. Those things are protecting those those topographical features, protecting the wildlife that we have up there, the mountain lions and the deer and from A to Z, the fish in the streams. We've actually restored rainbow trout back to some of the streams in the Santa Monica Mountains, which had been gone for many years. And that was an area that was threatened with major development. There wasn't a developer in town who didn't see an opportunity to build his subdivision or her subdivision in the middle of this beautiful, pristine area, thinking that
those would be valuable homes.
They would be valuable homes, and they were operating under the assumption that they would be the last homes, and then their residents would get these unobstructed views of the mountains until the next developer came in and obstructed their views and destroyed the terrain and the environment. So one of my main focuses has been to preserve the Santa Monicas in two ways. One is to acquire land with
that the
public
county
money.
will then own, or the state, or either one?
We have had a unique arrangement between the federal government, National Park Service, the state government through the various measures, bond measures that they had for acquiring open space, and we had two LA County special tax measures back in 1992 and 1996. I wrote the one for 96. My predecessor wrote the one for 92. That gave us money with which to buy land that not just in the Santa Monicas, but all over the region. It was a park bond measure that gave us the resources to buy parks in the inner city, to create open space where there was none, and to preserve open space and environmentally sensitive open space in the western part of the county and in the northern part of the county, the Tehachapi Mountains in that area. And so we've leveraged each other's dollars. Occasionally we need to go to the National Park Service, with whom we have an excellent relationship, and they'll put up money. They'll put up X, we'll put up Y, and we'll get the state to put up Z, and the Wildlife Conservation Board will put up W, and we've acquired, we actually have just tabulated the amount of acreage that we have acquired in the Santa Monica since I've been there on the board. It's over 10,000 acres of land that is in public ownership, and that's huge. And if you look at a Thomas Brothers map from 1975, and I have such a book, Thomas Brothers book, and you compare it to the Thomas Brothers map of...
Yeah, they don't know what that is, man.
know
We
what
have
Thomas
GPS
Brothers-
now.
yeah,
It's
I know.
like, who
Well, you
knows?
gotta get a
That's
Thomas
so-
Brothers map.
That's so old school.
Well, I am old school. The inside cover of the Thomas Brothers map shows parkland as depicted in dark green. So you can see what's publicly owned parkland. If you compare a 1975 book to a 2010 map book, you will see that the amount of green has exponentially grown, which is what we had in mind. So that's one thing we've done to protect the environment up there. And the other thing is where we can't buy it, where we can't afford to buy something, and or it doesn't have the natural resource value that the ones we do buy have, we've tried to limit the amount of development, confine it so that it's not sprawling, we let the mountains and the environment dictate the development, not let the development dictate the environment.
So let me take you back to your early career.
Sure.
Fairfax High School graduate, LAUSD.
Yep.
You couldn't get into Loyola Marymount, so you went to UCLA.
That's right.
Graduated from UCLA, then started a master's program at UCLA in history?
History of the British Empire.
History of the British Empire. Okay.
Yeah.
We probably have too many British historians, by the way, so it wasn't the greatest career choice. But anyway.
My dad warned me, my dad, who was a history teacher, warned me that don't be a history teacher, you can't make a decent living at it, but for God's sake, if you're going to be a history teacher, don't pick British imperial history because you'll never get a job. And like in so many other things, I didn't listen to my dad and went on to get I was on the doctoral program in British imperial history, and after my first year in the doctoral program, I said, this isn't for me, and I couldn't see myself for the rest of my life sitting in a library poring over books in English and French and German, and so I picked up my master's. In those days, you could get a master's in a year and a half, and I went to my doctoral advisor and I told him I was going to leave, and he didn't resist. He said, if that's what you want,
okay,
go ahead.
So then you leave, you're no longer a graduate student, and you decide to run for public office.
Well,
Why? I mean,
I was involved in politics while I was in school and in college. I ran part of the office of the McGovern for President campaign in 1972 here in Southern California, when he challenged Richard Nixon, and we lost that
You
election.
guys remember that in the history books, right? That, you know, there was a President Nixon in 1972. Go ahead.
And I worked in that campaign. When I finished graduate school, I then ran an organization called the Southern California Council for Soviet Jews, which was a human rights advocacy group to promote freedom of immigration for Jews who lived behind the Iron Curtain, who were being persecuted. And I did
And
that
this is at the height of the Cold War.
height of the Cold War, and I actually did that throughout my college career. I didn't run the organization, but I had my own student organization. I was a huge social activist, and really that's what put my name on the map in the neighborhood and
Tell
the
me the
community I lived.
process where you decided to run. Who did you talk to? How did you make the decision? What did your wife say?
My wife loved the idea, and we didn't have any kids then, and the whole idea to run, I never really had an ambition to be an elected official. I really would have been real happy being a senior staff person on Capitol Hill. That was really my interest. My interest was primarily in foreign affairs because of my work in the human rights movement and the time. At the time the Vietnam War was raging, so foreign affairs was a major issue. But when Ed Edelman, who was my predecessor, was elected to the Board of Supervisors in 1974, I decided to give it a shot, to run for his city council seat. And it was a lark. I figured if I was ever going to run for office, that was the time to do it. I had no responsibilities at home, no kids. And I had been accepted to UCLA Graduate School of Business at the time, and I asked them for a one-year leave of absence.
This is great. So he can't hack it as a historian, so he goes to the dark side, the business school.
That's right.
Okay.
And they gave me a one-year leave of absence so that I could run. I was totally prepared to come back in the fall of 1975 to resume my academic career. And a funny thing happened on the way to business school was I won the election for city council.
Was this a special election?
It was a special. It was.
That means that there was not a regularly scheduled election because Ed Edelman had won a higher office. The seat was vacant.
In the middle of his term.
In the middle of his term.
So they filled the terms, and they have since the late 60s. They have filled all the vacancies through a special election, and that was.
But nobody expected you to win.
No, nobody did, and frankly, I didn't.
You didn't expect
to.
So what was the point of running?
You never know, and you know you got to take your shot, and if you want to do something, you take your shot, and I.
So you were 26.
I
That
up
was
against,
37 years ago.
37 years ago. So I was up against an aide to Tom Bradley, who was his chosen candidate, Fran Savage.
And this is at a time where Tom Bradley is at the height of his
height
power.
of his popularity. Yeah. And Roz Wyman, who was a former councilwoman who had been in the city council in my seat for 12 years from 1953 to 65. And there were 7 or 8 other candidates in that election, and me. And Fran Savage had the support of both the United States senators, every congressman in the area, every state legislator except for one, and she did not have Ed Edelman's support. He stayed neutral in that election. And Roz Wyman, who Mrs. Savage thought was her biggest threat, so that contest in the primary election was a war between Mrs. Savage and Ms. Weiner. And Mrs. Wyman. Weiner was her maiden name. They both became very good friends of mine, by the way, and they're both very good people, and would have been and have been great public servants in their own right. However, because they went after each other, they ignored me. Nobody thought I had a chance, so nobody bothered to take me on. And Mrs. Savage ran what we call a negative campaign, as you call it today, against Roz Wyman. Such an aggressive negative campaign that she depressed her vote, and I beat Mrs. Wyman by 359 votes. It was 1% of the vote. I beat her by, I think Savage had 33%, I had 19, and Roz had 18%. Now all of a sudden on election night in the primary, I'm in the runoff.
So the person that came in first has 33%.
Right.
You have 19. The person that came in third has 18.
Right.
Right. You have to get 50%.
Have to get 50%.
So you don't have 50%, so then there's a runoff between you and the person that got almost twice as many votes as you.
That's right. But here's the deal, that what happened was Wyman and I split the vote in the eastern half of the district, and Savage got 33% basically everywhere, a little less in the eastern half and a little more in the western half. And the more affluent part, she did better than in the less affluent part. And then when the runoff came, Roz Wyman endorsed me.
Well, of course, the other candidate had been negative the whole campaign, right?
You can look at today's news and see what's going on, and so in the runoff, I beat Fran Savage 54.5% to 45.5%. So she improved by 12%, and I improved by whatever 55 minus 19 is, 34%.
So you get to LA City Council. You're the youngest council member, not the youngest council member ever. I think Roz Wyman was back in 53.
Roz Wyman was 22 when she was elected in 53, and Kenny Hahn was also 26, but a younger 26 than I was. So I was the third youngest at the time I was elected.
Right, but at the time, the other 14, you're the youngest one of the 15 currently at that point.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
there were members of the city council who were old enough to be my grandfather. Several.
So talk to us about those early years on the LA City Council. I mean, it's a different, compare the council of today, the way it's run, not the individuals, but just the culture of LA City Council today compared to when you started in 1975.
Well, the biggest difference, without question, is term limits. Term limits has totally destroyed city government, as it has destroyed, in my opinion, state government.
So you're against term limits?
Very much so. And
LA County has term limits as well.
We have it now, and I think that's a mistake, although I'm done, and I'm happy to be done when my term is up.
So you cannot run anymore for
I cannot run for Board of Supervisors anymore.
So
I'm in my last term.
Right, so you got reelected in 2010, so at
the end of 2014, I'm
you
done.
are done as a county supervisor. Yeah.
So, but what's happened with term limits is when I came to the city council, there were people who had been in the city council for quite a number of years, and some of them were really good, and some of them I did not agree with on a whole lot of things. But the one thing you did have is you had an institutional memory. You had people who took the long view of public policy, that if they were going to build a sewer line that was not going to get finished for 6 years, they weren't going to abandon that project because they weren't going to be around in 6 years to cut the ribbon on it. One of the worst things that's happened in the term limit environment is that politicians, who are human beings, don't make decisions as often as they should.
Okay, now, I've heard that argument constantly, and I kind of agree with it, but what's the proof? How do you quantify that? How do you prove that that is the case?
Well, look around you.
Mm-hmm. It could be other environmental factors that have impacted the quality of elected officials.
There may be, but I think this is the main factor that is affected. Look around you. The transportation infrastructure for the region has been slow to materialize, although
wouldn't that be just the tax base and the lack of commitment from people in general?
I think that's a part of it, but I think it's also, I think a major part of it is that the body politic says to itself, it's hard to get the voters to approve a tax. It's hard from A to Z, there are reasons why not to do something. And besides, I'm not going to be around. Why should I spend my political capital to do something that will be opened long after I'm gone? I'll give you an example. It's a recent example, and it goes against what I just said, but it's an exception and not the rule. In 2008, when the mayor and I decided to put a half-cent sales tax on the ballot, what became known as Measure R, to fund highway and mass transit improvements in Los Angeles County, it really was only because he had been around a while. He was about to enter his second term. I'd been around a while. Some of the others on the Metropolitan Transit Authority Board had been around a while, who decided to take the chance and to spend the political capital to raise the money, to go to the effort to get this thing on the ballot, and do it at the time that the economy was collapsing. The fall of 2008 was when the economy started to collapse. And the notion that you could get and we needed 2/3 of the vote. It wasn't a simple majority. To get a tax approved for this purpose under the state constitution required 2/3 of the people to vote for it. The idea that we get 2/3 of the people to vote for a half-cent sales tax in the middle of the worst economic collapse since 1929 was just fantasy. And in fact, before we made the final decision to pull the trigger on this proposal, I said to the mayor, I said, you know, my gut tells me that there's no way that we're going to get 2/3 of the vote in this environment. And we had already polled it months earlier, and the poll showed that we were close to 2/3, not quite there, but certainly within striking distance. And I said, I think we ought to do one more poll now that we're in September of 2008. Let's test it to be sure before we go ask our friends to help fund a campaign for this, that we've got a shot at it. We took another poll, and it showed we were at 66%. And I still didn't believe it, but I had to trust the research, because that's what you do a poll for.
What do you think accounts for that? 2008?
Well, I'll tell you what accounts for that, Fernando. What accounts for the Measure R passage was the overarching problem that we have in Los Angeles County of traffic congestion. And it affects every community in the region, whether you live in the San Gabriel Valley or in the West Side or in the San Fernando Valley or in Cerritos. It is the bane of our existence right now. To get across town, to get from home to work, to get from home to school is an ordeal. And your whole life revolves around how you're going to get from place to place, how much time you're going to have to allocate to go someplace. Right. And everybody feels it. And they feel it to such an extent that they were willing in the middle of this economic collapse to assess themselves another half-cent sales tax.
So half-cent means that for every $2 of any product that you buy in LA County, a penny will be charged extra. And then that penny goes to this fund to build mass transit, to do other transportation projects. Let me go back to the city council, though. 1975 to 1994, you are on the city council, right? What do you consider your biggest accomplishment during that time?
Well, there are a whole bunch of them. I represented a district that, as I like to say, my district was the donut, Beverly Hills was the whole. My district surrounded Beverly Hills, so it was from a real estate point of view, it was a very hot area, and it was constantly under pressure for overdevelopment. And I walked into a city council that was very pro-development. You couldn't get environmental legislation through the city council if your life depended on it. And yet my district was getting carved up. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is changing the debate in city government between 1975 and 1986, which is when we capped it with an initiative that my colleague Marvin Browdy and I, Proposition U, that cut commercial development in the city, in most parts of the city, by half. But it was so bringing some rationality to the land use zoning system of the city, and helping make the issue of environmental protection, of sound zoning policy and land use policy part of the debate was a great achievement. And
you think it's gone too far, though?
No, I don't think it's gone too far. Do you think? Do you think the city is underdeveloped?
Many developers do.
I know many developers do.
Many people think that they should have a right to do what they want with their property, that there isn't enough housing in certain areas and not enough commercial in others.
That's the different issue. And you know, developers want to make money. That's why they're in the business they're in. Nobody goes into business to lose money. And I have no qualm about a developer or anybody else who wants to make money. But if you're going to make money and cost me money, if you're going to increase your property value by building a high-rise next to my home that casts a permanent shadow on my home, then the value of my property has just diminished, so that your value has gone up. That's not right. And as far as housing is concerned...
But even to get to that decision, whether one would decide, no, you can't do that because you're going to have a negative impact, many people think it takes too long to do anything.
I think that's true. I think it does take too long, and on that, we all have sympathy for, I mean, it's not just developers who suffer from that. Communities who are fighting developers often get tired and weary of fighting it. On the housing issue, this city is zoned for 1 million more housing units than it currently has. So the capacity, however many housing units we have in Los Angeles, There is zoning capacity today, without a single change of zone, to add another 1 million housing units. And nobody talks about that if they're developers, because what happens is what the former planning director of the city, Gail Goldberg, said a few years ago. She said, in most cities, the value of a piece of land is determined by what the zoning is. Mm-hmm. In Los Angeles, the value of a piece of property is determined by what the developer thinks he can get the zoning to be. So, I'll give you an example. The old Channel 13 studios on La Brea Avenue, a developer bought that property, paid twice as much for the property than it was worth, based on the zoning of that property. But he had, I guess, faith and good reason to believe that if he went to the city, he could get the zoning increased. And in fact, the city gave him double the zoning, which suddenly made his purchase price rational. But it would have, if it hadn't been a lawsuit and things hadn't worked out and settled between the neighborhood, it would have destroyed the neighborhood. So developers and communities, homeowners groups, environmentalists, we all have to play by the same set of rules. But if the rules are constantly changing, then it's anarchy. And that's what we've had in Los Angeles. It's been too much anarchy, too much spot zoning, too much, I know the councilman, I know the planning commissioner, I know the mayor, I contributed to his campaign, so I'm going to go see if I can get a better deal than what I had when I bought the property. And it happens too often in this town.
Hey, let's talk about some recent issues that have come up. The Coliseum.
Yeah.
The Coliseum's got a weird governing structure, and the county's part of that, so I want you to talk about that. You yourself have sat on the Coliseum Commission, and there's all kinds of crazy things going on. Who was asleep at the wheel, or what was happening? What occurred? Tell the students in the audience what's going on with that.
It's a long story, and I can't really get into all the details because there's a criminal investigation going on, and we're...
But what is public? What's in the newspaper?
Yeah, the Coliseum Commission, the Coliseum...
Explain the three parties that are...
Coliseum and the sports arena are governed by a tripartite joint powers agreement. That is, 3 members of the 9-member commission are appointed by the city, 3 members are appointed by the county, and three members are appointed by the state.
So who owns the property?
The property is owned by the state, the land. The improvements, the actual stadium, are owned by this joint powers authority. So the county, the city, and the state own a third each of the Coliseum and of the sports arena, but the land under which those facilities are built are owned by the state. And the Coliseum Commission has a lease from the state. The state leases that property to us to manage
So the Coliseum Commission only governs the actual Coliseum and the sports arena. It doesn't govern Exposition Park.
That's
correct.
Govern,
okay.
Yeah. The Exposition Park is, if you look at a map of Exposition Park, color-coded for ownership, it looks like Bosnia. It's or like the old Yugoslavia. The city owns the Rose Garden. The county owns a parking lot next to the Natural History Museum, and of course it owns the Natural History Museum. But the state may own another parking lot on the other side of it, and so it's a hodgepodge. It looks like a checkerboard. Exposition Park is one of the most disorganized places, and one of the most disorganized governing structures you'll ever see. But the Coliseum is one part of that, and so that part of the Exposition Park where the Coliseum and the sports arena sit are governed by the Coliseum Commission. So what we had, just to answer your question, is we had a general manager and other staff at the Coliseum who allegedly engaged in an effort to steal money. And we'll see how the district attorney's investigation unfolds, and expect that in the weeks ahead there will be some resolution from the district attorney. I'd be surprised if there weren't indictments that came down, but I'm not privy to all the information.
You were on the governing board.
Yes.
And how often do you guys meet?
Once a month.
Once a month. And then what's the agenda look like? Obviously none of these issues were on the agenda, but how would someone like you or any of the other members be expected to know what was happening? And I guess the bottom line, is it a good idea to have kind of a part-time governing structure? Right?
Well, most of local government is a part-time governing structure, Fernando, as you know. Every city council except for the LA City Council is part-time, and that's the way it is up and down the state of California. And most of the boards that we sit on, the MTA board, the Transportation Board, is a part-time board. It meets once a month. It has committees that meet another day a month. That's the way it is. What you can't do, what you can't stop, is when you have a conspiracy to defraud your board, going on by the people under your board, and you have independent audits, which we had, which showed that everything was on the up and up and everything was cool. But when you have people who are siphoning off money off the books, or a kickback scheme that was totally off the books, you can't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
and so that's been the problem for us.
Just from newspaper accounts, and what happened was that there was a rave there and a young girl died, and I think that's what partly started the whole process of unearthing this.
No, that's not what started the whole process of unearthing this. Let me we uncovered it. We uncovered it. We had a whistleblower come to us and tell us that, and detailing, and had documents to prove it, that he was kicking back money to a member of the staff of the Coliseum. And
so one of the contractors that was getting
Correct.
the contract was actually kicking back to somebody
That's
else, and then
right.
he came and told on himself.
That's right. Told on himself and told on the people who he was.
Why did he do that?
Well, you'd have to ask him. I have never talked to him, so I wouldn't know.
Okay.
I have my suspicions, but what can I tell you? I don't know, and it wouldn't be fair for me to speculate. However, when we got wind of that, when we had the whistleblower, we hired an investigator, our own private investigator, who gave us a report, and a very voluminous report, which detailed all the things that have now been in the press, and we turned it over immediately to the district attorney. In the meantime, we tripped over another problem that we had with the rave promoter, and that's still under investigation, and I'm not sure we know everything that went on with the rave promoter.
Recently I read about suitcases full of cash paying unions.
That's another issue, and that may be more of a union problem or the rave promoter's problem than it is a Coliseum problem, although I'm not 100% sure. This is something that we've just come across in the last couple of months.
Also recently read that the Coliseum Commission has not upheld its bargain with USC in terms of the football and all the what they agreed to, the improvements they agreed to.
Well, that's true, but one of the reasons that we were not able to, our deal with USC several years ago, the lease that we subleased the Coliseum to USC, our deal with them was that we were supposed to make certain improvements to the stadium at certain periods of time, certain thresholds, chronological thresholds. When the electronic music festivals went bust, they didn't go bust, we kicked them out for a variety of reasons, not least of which was dishonesty by the promoters. We lost our biggest revenue provider to the stadium other than USC. And by the way, USC's attendance has not been the greatest in the last couple of years because of their problems, so that diminished a little bit of our revenues. And the Coliseum is not a money-making facility. It's an old, tired facility that has a lot of competition for its business.
It's a cultural landmark.
It's a cultural landmark, but we used to get a lot of soccer games.
Why not just give it back to USC? Not give it, but lease it to USC and let them take care of it.
I think we're going to do that.
Okay.
I think we're going to do that. And USC and the Coliseum are in the final stages of a negotiation now, which I hope is final, where the Coliseum will give a long-term lease to USC, in exchange for which USC will make somewhere upwards of $80 million worth of improvements to the stadium. It'd be a great deal for USC, and it's an even greater deal for the people of LA County.
You are now the chairman of the board for the county?
For the Board of Supervisors. Yes.
I know that Mike Antonovich likes to call himself mayor when he's chairman of the board.
Right.
Right. So what's the duties as a chairman? How is that any different?
We rotate the chairmanship every year. So every 5 years, a member of the board becomes chairman. The duties are largely administrative. I have to run the meetings and take care of some administrative details that the chairman has to do, sign documents on behalf of the county that the chairman's required to sign. But for the most part, it doesn't change my quality of life.
But what's the recent controversy about you trying to cut off a debate or having the public be able to make comments? What's that all about?
You should read Jim Newton's column from last Monday or yesterday, and I think it was the best depiction of what's going on. Well, under the Open Meetings Act of the state of California, all local governments are required to allow people an opportunity to be heard on any item on the agenda, and then we set aside under the law a certain amount of time at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, for any item that is not on the agenda. And in most legislative bodies, in most Brown Act, which is the Open Meetings Act bodies, most of the people don't abuse the system. People they come long distances to be heard on issues that are important to their community or important to them economically or for whatever reason. But at the Board of Supervisors, we have had 2 or 3 people who come to the board meetings every week and sign up on almost every item on the agenda, sometimes on almost every item.
I have students like that they ask me a question on every single statement
I don't think
I
you
make.
have students like that, because they could never get into Loyola Marymount if they were like that. But we have one guy who comes every week and takes his time, his 3 minutes or 2 minutes to speak about the apocalypse. And he's very entertaining the first couple of times, but after 3 years, it gets kind of tiring.
Same story, 3 years?
Yeah, and so we have a small number of people who have abused the process. And if you could think for a moment, we give people 3 minutes on every item to speak.
How many items are typically on an agenda?
It could be anywhere from 40 to 100.
Yeah.
So let's say it was 70, and 2 people each asked to speak on all 70 items.
And they do this.
That's 140 times 3. How many hours is that? And they've done this. In fact, one of the persons who's done this was quoted in the paper as saying, "I often sign up on all the items just to annoy the board." Well, he's not annoying the board, because the board's going to be there all day anyway. We have business to transact and we'll deal with it. The people that are really paying the price are the rest of the public who have come there to be heard legitimately on items that they truly care about. These folks come, the ones I'm referring to, come and speak on
They're
gobbledygook.
usually referred to as gadflies.
Yeah, and gadflies would be giving them too much credit, because in this case, they're just, they come and they do their thing, and then they run home and watch themselves on the replay of the board meeting, which is fair enough. So we give them the time that the law allows, but we're not obligated to let them speak on every item for 3 full minutes and spend 6 hours listening to garbage. But they get to spew their garbage just in a shorter period of time, and we don't manage their content. I would never do that, but it would be impossible.
So what's
for us
your
to operate.
proposal?
I have no proposal now. I had a proposal. We pulled it back because.
But what was your proposal?
The proposal was to increase the amount of time that people had to speak on agenda items from 2 minutes to 3 minutes, and to reduce the amount of time from 3 minutes to 2 minutes on non-agenda items where most of the abuse takes place. And that if people wanted to speak on multiple items, they had to do that within their 3-minute allotment. Most people, almost all people, come and speak on one item. It's only the so-called gadflies that sign up on multiple items. In the city of Los Angeles, the city council allows 15 minutes total for public comment on non-agenda items, 15 minutes. And you get 2 minutes each to speak on the non-agenda items. So if you're person number 8 and you signed up 8th, you're out of luck. You don't get to talk at all. Everybody gets to talk at the Board of Supervisors. But I invite you, anybody who's interested in this very important issue, which has gotten more attention than poverty or abused children in the last month, I invite them to watch the board meetings yourself, and you be the judge. Come down. You're welcome to come down and watch the board meeting and see for yourself whether we're being unreasonable. Jim Newton found that we were not being unreasonable.
Yeah. Hey, so back to the Coliseum Sports Arena. UCLA is playing its basketball home games at Sports Arena because they're redoing Poly Pavilion.
That's right.
And so, have you been to games over there?
I have not.
Oh, okay, I was going to ask you about the stadium and its longevity, whether it would. What are we going to do with that sports arena once UCLA stops using it?
I think the sports arena's days are numbered. I think it's as old and tired as the Coliseum is. The sports arena, even though it's younger, is much more tired. Yeah. And there's no room in this town for the arena. We have too much competition. When you look at what's happened since 1959, when the sports arena was built, it was the only arena of its kind in Los Angeles. Today you have Pauley Pavilion, you have Staples Center, you have the SC Galen Center at USC, and I'm sure I'm missing
the Forum,
the
Gersten Pavilion.
And absolutely, Gersten Pavilion. And so the
So,
sports
but wait a
arena
minute,
is like,
you haven't been to a UCLA basketball game this year?
I have not.
So after LMU beat UCLA, you just couldn't bear
I
to
couldn't
go?
take it. No.
So let me ask you, this is just a one-word answer. Okay, Lakers or Clippers?
Agnostic.
Angels or Dodgers?
I like them both. I think
Ducks or Kings?
Kings.
LMU or Pepperdine?
I represent Pepperdine.
USC or, I don't know, who could we compare USC to? I forget that.
Yeah, people say that we don't have a professional football team in LA, but I point them to USC.
What
That was
vote?
supposed to be funny.
What vote, either in city council or county supervisor, do you regret making? That you wish, you know, because things that you found out or things that how it unfolded or the impact that it ended up having. Which do you regret the most?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's one that I suppose I would look back on and I don't know, regret is the right word, but kicking myself may be a better
That you would have
word.
changed your vote if you
Yeah,
you know
and
now
that
that you
was-
would.
In the late 1980s, the city was, the city council and the mayor were debating whether to expand the convention center in downtown. And the argument for expanding the convention center, which was going to cost $500 million, and that was in 1988 money, not today's money, it was a lot more money then. The $500 million to expand the convention center would pay for itself, we were told, and we had consultants and experts and everyone.
Whoa, that was a developer who.
Yeah, so it's all right.
Will
It makes it interesting. So we had experts so-called experts who said that because you expand the convention center, you'll get more convention business. It will provide the revenue to pay off the bonds that you'll have to use to borrow the money to build the $500 million convention
So in
center
other words,
expansion.
it would pay for itself. But every single study for a parking lot, for the airport, for every single time the city or the county gets a report about trying to build something, the metro and the ridership and all that, it's always, the consultants always come in and say it's going to pay for itself.
They don't always do that, and even when they do, it's incumbent upon the decision maker to validate for him or herself whether it's credible. And
So you voted for the expansion.
I did. I voted for the expansion, and it turned out it did not produce the kind of business that the convention center promoters promised. And the result was that since the revenues from business at the convention center were not being generated to pay off the bonds, the city's general fund had to pay off the bonds because it was ultimately a city obligation. And that obligation ran anywhere from $50 to $65 million a year, which was a lot of money for
And when
the
you
city.
add it all up together over the
It
several years?
was far, I don't know what it was overall, but more than $500 million, that's for darn sure, because it was...
But you weren't alone in that decision.
Oh, no.
It was pretty overwhelming.
It was probably very overwhelming, and there may have been one or two dissenting votes. If I had to do that vote over again, I certainly would, knowing then what I know now, I certainly would change my vote.
But one would make the argument that every big city needs a convention center.
Yeah, but the issue for the city of Los Angeles was that just having a convention center and nothing else, no other infrastructure around it, did not guarantee the success of the convention center. In fact, one could argue that it guaranteed that it would be a flop, a white elephant, and that's exactly what our convention center has been. Now, since in the last decade or so, since AEG has come in there and built more infrastructure, LA Live, a couple of hotels. One of the things that was wrong with the convention center is there were no hotel spaces within walking distance of the convention. You go to any major city that has good convention business, whether it's Las Vegas or San Diego or even Anaheim, and certainly New York, you have ample hotel space. When a convention wants to come in with 10 or 15,000 delegates, they want to be able to put their people up in a hotel. They don't want to have them go from Marina Del Rey to downtown. It's just,
or from Century. Actually, many people
Century
stay on
City.
Century Boulevard and then have
Century
to
Boulevard.
attend the convention center.
and so that was the mistake that that I think, or the thing that we overlooked at the time, and now that's changed. Now here's the thing, I'm not sure that there's anything you can do about making downtown Los Angeles as hot a convention area as Las Vegas. Let me ask you this, if you had the choice to go to a convention in Miami Beach, in Las Vegas, in San Diego where the convention center is on the shoreline, or Anaheim at Disneyland, which one would you pick? I think Los Angeles downtown, for most of these last years, would have been the last on your list. Right. Now that's changing, and Los Angeles downtown has become a much more happening place, and it will continue to become a more happening place as things continue to get developed down there, whether it's the football stadium.
Are you for the football stadium?
I am philosophically for the football stadium in that location. The financial aspects of it, I actually haven't scrubbed the numbers. This doesn't come across my desk. It's not a Board of Supervisors decision. But the issue of whether there should be a football stadium at that location in downtown, I think it's a good location because that particular piece of property is dead. Right. It's an old part of the convention center. Nothing of any value is ever going to be built there. It's right next to the freeway. And the football stadium is also dead space for most of the year. But this particular one, because it's enclosed, is going to be used far more often if it's built than just for football season. It will be used for Final Fours, the NCAA Final Fours, conventions, massive conventions. It offers a lot of opportunities that don't exist currently.
Let me take you back 20 years ago, April 29th, 1992, the riots or disturbances. You were an LA City Council member.
Yes.
What do you remember about those 3 days?
I remember a lot. When the verdict came in that afternoon, I believe it was in the early afternoon.
Did you expect that verdict? Did you have an inkling?
If I were betting on that, I would have bet marginally that it would have come out that way. It was in Simi Valley, and I just had a sinking feeling. What I did not expect, and it absolutely floored me, was the reaction, and obviously everybody miscalculated the pent-up frustration that existed in the African American community in particular. But I'll tell you the story because it was really a picture's worth 1,000 words. That evening, the night of the verdict, there was a community come together at the First AME Church in the Crenshaw area, Crenshaw district, and I attended it, as did a number of the other elected officials. Mayor Bradley spoke, and there were television cameras everywhere. And at one point during the event, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, at the event, one of the broadcasters, I think it was John North of KABC Channel 7, asked me to come and do a live interview with him. And I stepped off the stage and went down to do a live interview with him. And down on the floor was this television monitor. And I'm looking at the television monitor and I see, businesses on fire, plumes of smoke all over Los Angeles. And I said, John, why are you guys running footage of the 1965 Watts riots? And he says, that's not footage of the 65 riots, that's live shot from our helicopter. And that was the first I'd known that any of us, because when we were in the church, while we were in the church, the riot began. And when I finally left the church, I was escorted by a group of deacons of the church to my car. My car had been totally destroyed. As were a number of other
They weren't just picking on you. They didn't know that was your car.
Me, no. And so it was a stunning thing. And then the violence spread from South LA to Central LA to the West Side. And there was a camera store a block away from my house that was torched the next day. And I get a call from a friend of mine who lives in the neighborhood who says, Sammy's camera's on fire and your wife is in the middle of Beverly Boulevard directing traffic. So I hung up the phone, got in my car and headed home. And
so
it was just an unbelievable
How different
shock.
is the city 20 years from,
How different is it?
Yeah, how different is LA than 20 years ago?
Well, in what respect? In economically?
Politically, economically, socially, culturally?
Economically.
And then leading to that question, could another riot happen within the next 3 or 4? Are the underlying causes of what happened in '92 still present, or have they been mitigated? And if so, how?
Well, I think the way the city is not different is I still think there is an economic apartheid, in the sense that that manifests itself in Los Angeles. There are people who are extremely wealthy. We have a middle class that's dwindling, and you have a growing poor population, not just poor economically, but poorly educated. And I think that's an issue that should be of concern. You know, I'm not a sociologist, and I'm not going to pretend to be a sociological analyst here, but in terms of what's different about LA today than 20 years ago, if you believe that the relationship between the Los Angeles Police Department and the community was a major factor, if not the major factor, of what sparked this riot in 1992, thank you, if you believe that was a major factor, I think that's been dramatically changed.
So the relationship between the community and police are better?
The relationship between the police and the community in every part of the city is better, but it's particularly better in the minority communities of Los Angeles, and especially in the African-American community, where Chief Bratton first of all, we had 2 African-American chiefs before Bratton, and I think that was something, but that was more symbolic than it was substantive. Bratton actually translated his plan into action and made a beeline for every community in Los Angeles, and did not exempt anybody from the engagement that he thought was important, and the entire police department felt was important. It's a different police department today than it was 20 years ago.
I would agree with that. Can another riot happen?
Well, you know, I hope not. But I think we need to learn the lessons from '65 and 92 and be more attuned to what's going on the street.
What was the city's official response to the riot? What did you, as a council member, the mayor, what did you guys do to respond both immediately and in terms of long term?
Well, the immediate response was to try to stop the riot,
right.
And you know, obviously.
I'm talking about 3 or 4 weeks later when you started assessing what happened. I mean, I remember obviously LAPD reform. That was one thing, and there was also an initiative on the ballot almost immediately that was already on there even before the riot had happened. I think Amendment F or whatever.
Charter Amendment F.
Charter Amendment F. There was the Community Development Bank.
Yep.
There was Rebuild LA, which then the city kind of helped start, but then had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So I find it difficult to, when I try to talk to the students about this happened in the city, and yet the city, it's hard for me to find tangible response from the city government in terms of the riots.
Well, I think that's not a fair characterization. I think the Christopher Commission reforms was a huge deal, and first and foremost, I believe that what sparked that riot was the hostility between the police department and the community, or the community and the police department. And there's no question about that. And anybody who lived through that period, as I did, understood the level of frustration that existed between the minority communities and the police department. One of the earlier things I did, you asked me what are the things that I'm most proud of. We never really finished that discussion, but one of the things that I'm most proud of was in the early 1980s, trying to deal with the issue of excessive use of force by the police department on minorities, especially in the African-American community, the carotid artery chokehold, which was killing many young men who would be alive today if we had some other way to subdue them. And it was and I held hearings. I was chairman of the committee that oversaw the police department at the time, and I held hearings in Pacoima, in South Los Angeles, and the tension, the hostility was palpable. And obviously that just blew up in '92, and it was a unique situation, very unique in terms of the Rodney King beating and the number of times it was aired on television, and people had a chance, myself included, to get really angry about it. So I think that the charter reform that took place in the 90s after the riots and the bringing in of people into the police department who shared the vision of the Christopher Commission and didn't just pay lip service to it was a huge deal. Now, second thing I would say is that economically, while the people who live in our city, the number of people in poverty has grown, some of the things that were missing in the central and south part of Los Angeles City, lack of supermarkets, lack of services, lack of medical care. Some of those are still a work in progress, but there's a lot of work that's been done, and you can go into South Los Angeles today and see services that are provided that were not provided 15, 20 years ago. And that's a tribute to the investment that the city made, either through itself or through private sector, or leveraging federal dollars, community urban development money, and I think there's been significant progress. Now, having said that, the long-term issue for Los Angeles or any city in the country or any city in the world is if you continue to have these disparities between the rich and the poor, between haves and have-nots, where people don't have the wherewithal to make ends meet and have to work 2-3 jobs a day to make ends meet. But you're asking for social trouble.
But what can city or county government do about that?
Well, I think it's more than city or county government. I think it's national government that's got to do something about that.
But I always think that city and county government can at least mitigate that. In other words, if there is poverty and you have to work 2 or 3 jobs, providing a transportation system where people can get from one place to the other, or providing that safety net in terms of health. I mean, the county, basically, it's a health system. It is one of the greatest things that the county does. So those type of things that you guys
yeah, but Fernando, and we do that, and we provide health care, and we provide ambulatory care and mental health, and we run 4 hospitals, and we do all those things. But that's managing the situation. Right. That's not taking people from here up to here.
I agree. But can county or city do anything to take them there?
Yes, the county and city, in partnership with the national government policies, in partnership with the private sector. It's got to be a team effort. There's no city in America that on its own, and no county in America that on its own is going to turn a city that has a significant percentage of its population living in poverty and bring them out of poverty. Yeah. This has got to be a national effort, and I think the President Obama is articulating a vision. First of all, I think he assesses the situation correctly, and he's articulating a vision that makes sense to me. You cannot have people who are this percentage of the population who control this much of the wealth. It's just a prescription for revolution.
But from a local level, is local government way too fragmented, and the mayor is just not strong enough? I mean, Mayor Bradley was having a tough time with his own police chief, couldn't tell him what to do in 1992. That was a very difficult situation.
Yeah, that's changed though. The relationship between the chief and the mayor has changed. That was one of the provisions of Charter Amendment F, is that the police chief was no longer a lifetime tenure. It was virtually impossible to fire a police chief in 1992.
Because you were on the council committee that could have reviewed him, or
no, we didn't review anybody.
Who reviewed the police chief?
The police chief was reviewed by the police commission, which was a body of 5 people appointed by the mayor, citizens, who would review the chief. But in order to fire the chief under the old charter, you practically had to catch him with his hand in the till. If he was just incompetent, that wasn't sufficient cause for firing him. And Daryl Gates, who was then the chief of police, knew that, played that charter like a Stradivarius violin, and he knew they couldn't touch him. And but the pressure.
He was autonomous.
Yeah, he was very autonomous.
Do you think Tom Bradley stayed too long as mayor? Do you think? I mean, Tom Bradley served for 20 years, from 1973 to 1993. The riots happened in '92. In 1989, the last time he got reelected. Those last 4 years weren't his best. There was the riots, there were all kinds of different issues. In retrospect, do you think he stayed 4 years too long?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I think Tom Bradley, now that I have the benefit of a third of a century or more to look back and compare him to all the other people I've dealt with, not just mayors, but governors and senators and councilmen and businessmen, that Tom Bradley, for most of his career, well, for all of his career, was one of the finest public servants that I've ever had the privilege of knowing. He would stand up to people, who, even his friends, and do the right thing, even when it was politically foolish for him to do so. And I have not seen an elected official like him since he left the scene. Did he stay too long? Obviously, the people of Los Angeles City did not think so because they reelected him in 1989. But I think,
Yeah, but nobody really ran
but
against
his
him in the
prime,
end.
was in his
No,
first 3 terms. I mean, he ushered in an openness in city government which had not been seen since the Fletcher Bowron days. He brought the Olympics to LA, which was a huge success, and largely because of his persistence and refusal to say no and refusal to accept failure. And I was a big critic of the way the Olympics were being brought here originally, when the city was going to undertake to do it. But Tom figured out that there was another way to do it,
Yeah.
and that was his greatest moment.
Yeah.
And he was a great builder and a great healer in this city. We have not had a mayor since, and I'm not sure we had a mayor before in the 20th century that reaches his level.
From everything I hear, you have a really good relationship with the current mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa. You guys sit on the MTA together. What kind of a job is he doing?
I think he's doing, right now, he's really is at the top of his game in terms of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, why is
leaving a
that?
legacy.
What took
I don't think it's something that took him long. If that was going to be your question, I shouldn't have interrupted you. But Antonio is a big dreamer and thinks big ideas, and good ideas are a dime a dozen. Good ideas are.
But isn't that the role of a mayor? The mayor should,
absolutely.
What are some of the qualities that you would like to see in a mayor? Obviously, you have to think big.
Yeah, I think a mayor needs to be first and foremost. He's got to have a thick skin. He has to have the interests of the city at heart, the whole city, and not just for today, but for the long term. Be nice if the mayor could be inspirational. Certainly, this mayor has been an inspiration to Los Angeles. And you've got to focus on the things that are important to the city, and whether it's transportation or whether it's infrastructure or whether it's simple things like paving the streets and trimming the trees. You've got to be able to stand up to stakeholders and special interests. You can't give away 25% pay raises when everybody else is given 9%. The next mayor is going to have one hell of a problem with the fiscal condition of the city. The city is in a heap of trouble, and the only thing that's going to get it out of trouble is either tough leadership or a booming economy, and there's no evidence of a booming economy anytime soon. It's coming back, but it's coming back incrementally. So the mayor is going to have to be, on the whole, tough, indefatigable, persistent in managing the affairs of the city and looking long-term at the infrastructure needs of the city. And when it comes to Antonio, I think on the transportation front, he's on the verge of creating quite a legacy for himself.
You talked about term limits, and term limits create an impact where, like currently, Antonio Villaraigosa is termed out. He cannot run for re-election in 2013. I think the election's March 2013, and he's done on June 30th, 2013. So people already start treating him as like lame duck, thinking, there's going to be a new mayor, et cetera. And so that has had a big impact. Is he a lame duck right now?
I don't think so. I think anybody who underestimates him is making a mistake. He is doing a great job of trying to focus Washington's attention on transportation infrastructure needs, not only in Los Angeles, but across the country. He's president of the National Conference, U.S. Conference of Mayors. He's used that position very productively and astutely to try to get infrastructure on the agenda nationally. We talk about unemployment in Southern California, unemployment across the country. The way to get employment back is to create jobs. The best jobs we can create are infrastructure jobs, construction jobs, building subways, building light rail lines, building highways, building buildings, building homes. That's the single biggest investment we can make in trying to turn the economy around. And I'll tell you, when you look at the national economy, and this is a point I've made for 3-4 years now, Los Angeles is about 7 or 8% of the national economy. Think about this for a second. California is 22% of the national economy. We're about a third of the California economy. So if you want to turn the national unemployment figures around, then it starts here in Los Angeles. So the Measure R program that we got approved in 2008, if we could accelerate that program with federal assistance now, if they could lend us money up front, we will pay them back over time. We could put 250,000 people back to work on construction jobs. That would be huge. And it would not just be huge for Los Angeles, but it would be huge for the country. Because if you solve the unemployment problem in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, but you don't solve it in California, you haven't solved the national statistical problem.
Right. So going back to this mayor's race, the election's going to be in the primary in March, and then the runoff, I think, in May. And there's several people who've already declared. And, you know, there's not much attention given the national election. And then I think until November, people aren't going to really pay that much attention. But people are already starting to raise money. How much money do you think it's going to take for someone to be a successful mayoral candidate?
I think it'll take whatever they can raise.
Roughly?
You've
been involved in politics for 37 years.
So have you. Who knows how much it'll take? It'll be a multi-million-dollar campaign for.
Okay,
for
collectively, when you think about everything that everybody's going to raise, are we talking about $15-20 million?
Could be.
Okay.
Could be.
So then the election starts, or the election will be in March. Really going to be active between, I think, November and March, but people have to line up. So in that time frame, when do you expect that you would announce that you're going to run for mayor?
Before March.
Before March.
Of 2013.
Before March.
I'll make a decision, and when I do, I'll let you know. You should invite me back.
So are you going to run for mayor?
I haven't made that decision.
Well, okay, what criteria are you going to use? How are you going to sit down and figure out whether you should run for mayor or not?
Well,
who are you going to talk to?
It's none of your business.
What do you mean? I reject that. Number one, I am a voter and resident of Los Angeles.
Yeah, okay.
I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, you'll know in due course.
No, but generically, who would you talk to? You're obviously thinking about it. Everybody's asking you. Everybody's saying you have to run, et cetera, et cetera. So you're thinking about it.
Not everybody.
Well, of course, not everybody. I could think of a couple of people. Some of them who are going to come to this class.
The bottom line is this. For me, this isn't a political decision. It's a personal decision.
That's where it should always start, right?
And it should always start, but it doesn't always start that way. But for me, it's a decision of whether I want to do what I'm doing for another 9 years of my life, or whether I want to do other things. I've always had in mind to do other things.
Now, explain the 9 years. So you're termed out
a year or more of a campaign, and then 8 years presumably in office if you're fortunate enough to get reelected. And so.
How old are you right now?
I'm 63, a very young 63.
Yeah. Running 4 miles a day.
That's right.
So that would take you to being in 71, 72 when you would be, if you were to run, if you were to get reelected.
Yeah, 74.
74.
Yeah. So that's the decision I'll have to make is whether I want to do this or do.
What else would you do?
There are plenty of other things I want to do, and this isn't the forum to get into it, but I have other things I want to do in my life, Fernando. I didn't plan on being in politics for 37 years, and I certainly didn't plan on being in it for 47 years, but we'll take it, that's on the one hand. On the other hand,
so there's the personal that every single time someone's running for public office, they have to have their spouse and their family behind them, because if not, I don't see how that works, and oftentimes you see that unfold. And anybody who would run for public office and not take that into consideration. What's another general criteria that one has to take a look at?
I think in my case, that's the only criteria. The family is not the issue, but is my personal considerations, which is what I just articulated. That's the only issue for me. It's not the political. I think if I ran, I'd be, to be modest about it, I think I'd be a very formidable candidate, and I think I'd be a very formidable mayor if I was fortunate to be elected mayor. I think the city needs somebody who's going to take the bull by the horns and make some tough decisions. And the assessment, whether I'm in it or not in it, that the people of Los Angeles are going to make is they're going to look for somebody who's tough enough to use Dick Reardon's old slogan.
I was going to say you can't use tough enough to turn LA around, because that was used already.
But I think that's the issue, and I think if you talk to average Angelinos these days, that's what they're looking for. They don't think the basics in the city are being taken care of, and I think they have a lot of justification for that.
Don't you have an obligation to run for mayor of LA, given your experience, given how long you've been in public office, how much you know, given that there are many people who expect that, number one, you would be right away one of the top, one or two individuals, and that you've led this city and this region for such a long time, that why would you walk away from LA?
First of all, why do you say I'd walk away from LA?
Because
37 years, 40 years,
no, because
is not exactly walking away.
Yeah, exactly. I would define it as walking. If you don't run for mayor, you will be walking away from LA.
Then I'm a traitor.
No, not a traitor. What's another word close to traitor that would capture? No, I strongly feel that you have an obligation. Okay, the city has invested a lot into your success, and you've created that success for the city as well. And I would be, not that I'm going to vote for you, but I would be greatly disappointed.
I didn't anticipate you would go that far.
Yeah, greatly. No, in all seriousness, given your record of public service, the idea that at this point in your life, at this point in your career, what you've accomplished, that you wouldn't run for mayor, I and many people would be greatly disappointed. Okay, number one.
I'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. Even if you weren't to win, you would raise the debate, the narrative, and the dialogue in terms of what the issues should be and how they would be framed in an election. And that in itself is the last public service that you can provide for this region, is either being mayor or shaping who is going to be mayor. So when are you going to announce that you're going to run for mayor?
Not tonight.
No, I didn't expect tonight. I didn't say tonight. I said, if
I'll let you know.
We know that there are no. In all seriousness, not you, but generically, how do you ask somebody for money to run for office? And then when you start thinking about LA, there's a $1,000 limit. And it's my estimation that a successful mayoral candidate is going to have to raise $3 to $5 million. And when you think about it, $1,000, that's a lot of phone calls. That's a lot of, I think that would be the one negative in terms of, hey, am I going to run for mayor? That means for the next year, I'm not going to be able to really do the job I do at the county. I'm going to have to be constantly campaigning, constantly raising money, that can't be fun when you're, I have no qualms calling somebody up and asking them money for Loyola Marymount University. I can't imagine calling them up, though, and asking them money for myself to run for public office.
Yeah, it's not easy. And it's as good as I am at it, it's one of the hardest things.
But what makes you good at compared to, and you probably know others that are really good. What makes them good about being a candidate and raising money? What is it? The technique, the personality?
Probably all of the above and many other things. But you have a loyal cadre of supporters and people who have faith in you or in others. Obviously, all the candidates will. For president, for statewide office, for citywide office, will raise a lot of money, and they do that. I like to think that people don't waste their money on people they don't have faith in. Sometimes they do, but that's not the majority of the people. The majority of the people have, make an investment in somebody who they think can do some good for the jurisdiction which they're running. And it's a very difficult thing, especially these days at $1,000 a crack. It's very difficult, and and it means that's all you do.
Right.
It's all you do 24 hours a day. And one of the most unpleasurable experiences I had when I was thinking of running in 1989 was that's all I did. All I was focused on was raising money, and it was a drag because I couldn't do what I got elected to do, as you said it yourself. But that's the price you pay for being in politics, right. And unfortunately, the price can be very steep.
Hey, we want to thank LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky for joining us here at Loyola Marymount University. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.